A very good morning, afternoon, or evening to all. And a very warm welcome to everybody joining us today for the second webinar in the Smart Space series on the theme of space identity, skilled work, and the professions. I'm Eamonn Molloy, a faculty member at Pembroke College and the Side Business School at the University of Oxford. I'd like to thank the Side Business School, Pembroke College, and the Aeronautical Society of the University of Oxford for supporting this event. To our online audience, we welcome your questions throughout, and we kindly ask that you post them in the chat function of your chosen platform, including your name and where you're located, please. There'll be about 20 minutes or so for Q&A later in the session. The aim of this series is to foster conversation and dialogue about how space is changing, from old space to new space, and to identify the social, economic, political, and ethical challenges that arise from this transition. Space is often seen as the domain of scientists, technologists, and a few powerful nation states. But this is changing rapidly as commercial space activities and applications become a reality. This is more than just the headline stunts by people like Elon Musk. It's a rapidly emerging market currently worth hundreds of billions of dollars globally. The implications of this for the funding of scientific exploration missions that don't always necessarily deliver a direct financial return on investment are potentially profound. Likewise, the nature and the scale of the demand for a skilled space workforce has only recently become a topic of discussion. New space will require not only scientists and technologists, but also lawyers, finance professionals, ethicists, among others. To explore these challenges with us, today we're very privileged to have a distinguished panel of eminently experienced and qualified speakers to offer their views. These are Catherine Mealing-Jones, Director of Growth at the UK Space Agency. Catherine leads on the UK Space Agency's goal of growing the UK space sector. She leads the development of new users, new applications, new technologies, and a new attitude to the use of space in order to grow the space sector. Catherine and her team are responsible for sector and industrial strategy, for delivering government input to development of Earth observation, telecommunications, applications, technology, and standards of working through the European Space Agency. Nationally and internationally, she's also responsible for providing the conditions to enable the development of regional and local clusters, including the UK Space Gateway at Harwell in Oxford, and ensuring that the benefits of space reach all parts of the United Kingdom. Catherine is a chartered public finance accountant, a lay member of council at the University of Bath, and a fellow of the Royal Aeronautical Society. Frank White, our second guest, is an author, a graduate of Harvard College, and a Rhodes Scholar. He earned an MPhil in politics from New College in Oxford. So welcome back, Frank. Frank's best-known book, The Overview Effect, Space Exploration and Human Evolution, is considered by many to be a seminal work in the field of space exploration. The fourth edition of The Overview Effect will be published in 2021 by Multiverse Publishing. A film called Overview, based largely on his work, has had more than 8 million plays on Vimeo. Frank conducted a series of interviews with astronauts at Johnson Space Center in June of 2019, which have now become the basis for NASA's series called Down to Earth, which is available on YouTube and other NASA social media platforms. In his latest book, The Cosmos Hypothesis, Implications of the Overview Effect, Frank poses the fundamental question: what is the purpose of human space exploration? Why has the evolutionary process brought humanity to the brink of becoming a spacefaring species? In Cosmo, he also shares the idea of the human space program as a central project that will engage a wide range of people in the process of exploring the universe. Frank also teaches at Harvard Extension School, Harvard Summer School, Boston University's Metropolitan College, and the Kepler Space Institute. And last but not least we'd like to welcome Sam Adlen. Sam is the Chief Strategy Officer for the Satellite Applications Catapult. He's responsible for developing a strategy that best supports the UK space sector growth, working with the world-class academic base and supporting development of the next generation of high-growth business. Following a PhD in remote sensing and working on a NASA Mars mission, Sam joined the Vega Group as a consultant focusing on satellite applications. From there, he held senior space sector strategy roles in Finmeccanica, started and successfully exited a startup in the logistics sector, and was lead technologist for Space at Innovate UK, the UK's innovation agency. Sam holds a master's in physics and a DPhil from Oxford University, as well as an MBA focused on innovation and entrepreneurship from Imperial College London. This panel will be Delighted to take your questions, as I mentioned earlier, which you can post in the chat at any time. The format will be that our panelists will each take turns to respond to 2 prompt questions that I will offer, after which I'll open up the floor for 20 minutes or so for audience Q&A. So without further ado, my first question to the panel is, how will the role of existing space agencies such as the UK Space Agency, NASA, the European Space Agency, JAXA, etc., change as a consequence of the rising interest and investment in the commercial space sector? In particular, will these changes have an effect on the amount and the kind of scientific research space missions? And I'd like to start with Catherine, please.
Thanks, Eamonn, and thanks everyone. Delighted to be part of the panel this afternoon. I think the first thing I'd say that all the agencies you mentioned are pretty different and continue to evolve and change for reasons that are nothing to do with commercial space. Some changes in the UK at the moment which are driven by a need to kind of centralise the government approach to space, for example. And I think new players and new partnerships are happening between agencies and the commercial sector all the time. You're seeing the rise of actors that aren't space agencies but are very institutional. So in Europe we have the European Commission, for example, which is taking an increasing role in commercial space and space entrepreneurship. So I think I take the question as a bit of a proxy for overall institutional and commercial space. So we've seen some interesting relationships develop over the last decade or so between, for example, NASA and the commercial sector, where there's been a lot of sort of anchor tenancy activity. But I think this sort of anchor tenancy model will probably go a bit of a step further, and we'll increasingly see more innovative ways of space agencies and other actors procuring things on commercial frameworks. Obviously, government, I think, increasingly getting involved in the venture area. I think given the high risks in space, we'll probably, in the UK, for example, organisations like the British Business Bank making investments in organisations which are concerned with venture capital. So I think overall, I think the institution, when it comes to scientific exploration, to set the roadmap and deliver some of the backbone infrastructure. For example, things like long-range missions and series of missions. And then the space sector can innovate around that and kind of fill in the gaps to a kind of broad blueprint which will be set by the space agencies and by the government side. So I think government will do over the next 10 years more R&D and innovation stimulation. I think the institutional side will pull in more adjacent sectors, and we see that more and more. I think the activity of the commercial sector will mean that the institutional side will do more to set the rules and norms of behaviour in space. And I think that probably the government side will focus more on the thinking of infrastructure, deep space infrastructure, for example, communications, navigation, space domain awareness, those kind of things. I think you might see institutional players going more to complement the commercial side into the discovery side, so more university collaborations, more prestige missions, which may or may not draw on commercial actors. So I think there's a real tension in scientific exploration, given the overall financial situation that the world is in, the need for agencies to show the value to the citizen. Whether this will manifest itself in more communications around scientific missions and the broader benefits they bring, or a different mix of programmatic, so that we see a sort of complement to some of the science missions being more real world applications. I think we'll see that continuing to flow. So I think continuing evolution, but I think we'll see the agencies continue to evolve for a variety of reasons, and that continue to evolve and change in ways that we probably can't predict today.
That's great. Thank you, Catherine. Fascinating. So I think now we'll turn to Frank for his response. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Eamonn. It's great to be here with such a distinguished panel, and virtually to be back at Oxford. It's wonderful to at least have a feeling of being back at Oxford once again. I'm going to focus on NASA and the US experience because that's what I know the most about. I agree with everything Catherine has said, and she did a very nice job of covering the overview, if you will, of the global picture. NASA has been affected by the rise of commercial space activity. However, it didn't come out of the blue. NASA's been pretty involved in making it happen. After years of resisting new actors coming into the arena, NASA began to change around 2006 with the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services Program, quite a mouthful, also known as COTS. They had always worked with the big aerospace companies. NASA really doesn't build rockets. It does contracts with others to do that. But it was a breakthrough to start working with unknown entities like SpaceX and Kistler Aerospace and others who we don't hear about anymore. But that was really the beginning. And I think it's important to look at the American experience and understand that this kind of public-private partnership is within the tradition. It's within the tradition of railroads, airlines, even the internet, where the government takes the lead and then eventually begins to turn over much of the activity to the private sector. And so in my own mind, that is what is happening today with NASA, SpaceX, Blue Origin, and other entities. And it's a symbiotic relationship when it works well. Everybody is really impressed with SpaceX today and what they've accomplished, which is remarkable, including reusability and bringing down the cost of launch. But they couldn't have done it without NASA. And I don't think Elon Musk would deny that. Of course, government got in his way at certain points, but overall, the relationship has been positive. And he's now repaid that early investment by creating a spacecraft that has not only resupplied the International Space Station, but has now sent astronauts there. NASA has also said, if you want to pay the price, you can send your own people there, and Axiom Space is paying $55 million per person to do just that on a mission that'll take place next year. Tom Cruise has even talked about making a film on the ISS. So we're seeing these changes. I think it's going to continue. It's going to evolve, as Catherine put it. NASA is still doing some things the way they've always done it, and Artemis is that kind of program, even though there are some private sector engagements in that program. How is it going to affect science? My sources tell me not very much. There's not going to be in the United States a lot of private science missions, maybe small ones. But I believe we can look ahead and see science and space science be funded by the government, which I think is appropriate. And I think that will continue, especially the big missions. NASA is going to play a big role there. Finally, I would say, I think it depends as much on politics as anything else. We have this situation where a new administration tends to rethink our space activities every time a new administration comes in. So Donald Trump moved everybody away from climate change, and Joe Biden is moving everybody back. And whoever might get elected next time might have their own ideas about where NASA should go, especially in the scientific arena. I will just leave with one question. This symbiotic relationship, I think, will be tested around moon missions and Mars missions, and we'll just see. I don't hear Elon Musk cooperating with anybody on his vision of going to Mars. He seems to be pretty intent on doing that himself. So for now, I'll leave it at that, but I think that's what's happening and that's where it's going.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Frank. Some really provocative thoughts there, which hopefully we'll be able to follow up on shortly. So, and next, Sam, over to you.
Thanks, Eamonn. Yeah, I mean, as both Frank and Catherine have noted, the space sector is changing rapidly at the moment, and it's been through several phases of evolution. So, and the role of agencies has sort of adapted over time through those phases. So you had sort of the 1960s and inspiration off to the moon, and space agencies being technically very strong, aspects of policy and regulation. You then got this sort of early commercialization phase with new businesses offering satellite communications, Earth observation, etc. So the agency starting to enable that and supporting aspects there. And then most recently, we've had this sort of democratization phase and the sort of commercialization of space with lots of entrepreneurs, things like small satellites, and space agencies looking to support in areas like entrepreneurship, innovation, commercialization, new applications, etc. And as I think particularly Frank alluded to, the role of the agencies has really shifted there over time. And it's moving always to the point where government is doing the hard stuff and leaving industry to then commercialize. And it's particularly pertinent now where a lot of the agencies are saying, look, low Earth orbit is for industry. Come on, industry, come and commercialize low Earth orbit. We're off to the space gateway, the moon, and Mars. And I think arguably the space sector is actually entering a next wave of innovation and growth focused on the ability to build big infrastructure in space through robotics and AI, through assembly and manufacturing. And that has really quite deep implications for the role of space agencies, I think, because space already touches lots of different sectors. Many of us are familiar with the fact that through communications and observation, you touch health and agriculture and transport. Well, with where the sector might be going in the next 10 to 20 years, you might have things like power from space, you have energy coming towards space, you might be developing drugs in the microgravity environment, more people might be going to space, you've got health coming towards space. You've got then sort of the transportation side of things, obviously, with people needing to move about, and then construction. So you've got all these different aspects and sectors. Most sectors over time will touch space. And that means that lots of different government bodies touch space. So the role of space agencies then is and how they evolve is quite interesting in terms of which bits the space agency keeps hold of versus other bits of the government covering them. And I mean, Catherine touched on some of the developments that we're seeing in the UK. And there's no right or wrong about this. And it'd be interesting to see which countries bundle which functions in with the sort of core space functions. I'm certainly really keen that actually looking at the exam question from the economic development perspective is something that's kept very close to space agencies. I think that's something that can really bring industry, government, research, security all together to really have these sorts of public-private partnerships at scale that Frank's really talked about. I think it's a really exciting time. So in terms of the question then around sort of scientific missions, well, there's definitely going to be a continued need for this fundamental planetary research and astronomy, etc. But because of the way it's developing, actually, I'm quite excited. I think we're actually going to see industry and research coming much closer together and having aligned objectives around things like how we can live, work on the moon, in the cislunar environment. And so actually, I think that we're probably going to see more funding for scientific missions, but that they might be actually more overlapped with perhaps what industry might also want. So I think the ability for industry and research to work together to really create something compelling that really propels the industry forward and delivers benefits to Earth at an even greater scale is really, really quite exciting.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Catherine. You paint a very rich picture between you. From an organization theory or a sociological point of view, this is, as you all said, an exciting and fascinating time. There's all sorts of new relationships, new partnerships, new challenges to institutions and organizations and their roles. Lots of opportunities in there, clearly, as well as lots of challenges, I think, for public, private, scientific research institutions. And while I think Frank's point about, this is within the tradition of these, government and industry research university partnerships, I do wonder whether this is something that is quantitatively and qualitatively different. It's an interesting question, but the picture, particularly that Catherine painted of, the uncertainty around how that's all going to pan out, and also Sam that you alluded to, it raises a lot of excitement, but potentially introduces some kind of risks. It's certainly not a clear-cut picture anyway in terms of, old space, new space, and the big institutional actors and new spin-offs and startups. So that richness of those interactions and the complexity of that ecosystem that you describe is really fascinating. So thank you. That was your first exam question. So the next one I think would be what does the future labour market for space professionals and skills look like? And what are the opportunities and challenges that you see in this regard? Because the picture that you've just described, all that complexity, implies lots of new people. Like it's not just the rocket scientists and the administrators anymore. It's business people and lawyers. So how do you see that, Shabian? How do you see that skills matrix, if you like, opening up? To you, Catherine, first, please.
Yeah, thanks. Checking my network connection, so hopefully I'm fair. Yeah, I mean, I think we're the established perception that you need policymakers and bureaucrats, you need lawyers, you need educators, you even need artists to communicate to people. So there's a really, a broad array of skills. I think that's kind of set. And in the UK, we've just sector skills survey. Anyone wants to find it, it's on the gov.uk website, and it very much dovetails with a look at diversion in the sector that we've also done, which either has just been published or is about to be published. I think a few sort of key things came out of that. One of was about the kind of the intersection of future skills that are going to be needed. Probably this isn't a big surprise, but as in any sector, you need the sort of hard technical skills, whatever technical skills they are. And you need the softer business development skills and the ability to bring on the future workforce within the workforce that already exists, which brings its challenges. I think we have a pipeline of people to come into the sector. Again, I'm speaking British perspective, and again, in a very international at our space kind of cluster in Harwell, there are literally dozens of navies represented there, and that's that sort of vibrant sort of inclusiveness of the sector is very much a feature, and I think that's become much more difficult for changes in our relationship with the European Union, but for other reasons with the current crisis as well. And what we're seeing is that actually wages being a bit driven up, and people are just poaching skilled people from other sector. So we've got a challenge in terms of how to actually expand the available pool, fill some of the shortages. So my sort of summary is that I think there's a bit of a battle for skill. I think there needs to be a bit more realism about whether people really need all the high skills that they are going for all the time, or whether actually in the future market people might to bring up and bring on. So there would be more of a role for training, a role for things like other types of apprenticeships. Crucially, a much more porous attitude. I think in the UK again seen people who've kind of to the sector and stayed in the sector. And I think we're going to have to see people out of adjacent sectors much more readily. I think we need to develop the future skills sector much more link with education and training, and you know, much more of an understanding about how school changes are going to have an influence. And I think there's the COVID crisis and what that mobility is going to be really challenging, and how we exploit different ways of bringing people into the workforce is going to be really interesting. So for all those reasons, I think the biggest issue actually is how you look beyond existing networks and existing ways of expanding the workforce, and how you really bring in new people, you know, with new backgrounds and new skills. I think there's a real kind of poor rethink needed actually about what that future workforce needs to look like and what those skill sets are, and then needs to get very close to government, the bits of government that look at future technology and universities in particular, to make sure that universities are their kind of opportunities and employers are opportunities that will mean that we're able to realise our ambitions in space, because the people to do that are a key limiting factor. So I see it as quite a challenging area for particularly the next sort of 5 to 10 years actually.
Okay, that's great, Catherine. Thank you. I was just wondering as well if you had access to the chat, if you could perhaps, or we could put a link to that skills survey that UK Space Agency has just done, which is a fascinating read, and I'd recommend it to anybody who's interested in this subject. So great. Thanks, Catherine. Over to you, Frank.
Yeah, thanks again, Eamonn. So I think the future is very exciting. I want to agree with both Catherine and Sam about that. If I were a young person, I would be very pleased to see the job market in this sector. I'm going to say something that's a little counterintuitive, which is I'm trying to stop using the word space as often as I do and focus on the word solar system or solar ecosystem, and begin to think about that as the arena in which most of the things we're talking about will happen. And to begin, as some of the copy promoting this series talks about, begin to think about space as a place, i.e. the solar system. And I like to say the rest of the solar system, because the Earth is, of course, part of that, that entity. And it seems to me that everything we do here on Earth, we will be doing in the rest of the solar system, something that Sam and Catherine both said. You know, in terms of what's really going on, I looked up a report by Axios, by Miriam Kramer, saying that venture capital firms invested $15.7 billion in 250 companies in 2020. That was in the middle of a pandemic. So we can imagine how this may grow. And I think it's reminiscent of the dot-com bubble in cyberspace in the 1990s. And of course, the bubble burst. A lot of money was spent, a lot of money was lost, but some strong firms emerged from that. And I really believe that for people considering this as a career, it's there. And as we've been saying, you don't have to be an engineer to do it. Now, if you look at the jobs available now, you're going to see a lot of engineers, not authors, not writers, not poets, even though all the astronauts I've interviewed said we really need to send poets out there so they can explain what it's like. But a poet can't create a rocket that will take an engineer into orbit, but an engineer can create a rocket that will take a poet into orbit. So we have to be patient about this. But I just looked at Indeed, which is a placement agency, and SpaceX has 689 jobs available as of today. Blue Origin has 323. Virgin Galactic, which has run into a few problems, has 27. Google has 1,039 and Apple has almost 3,200. So I think Catherine was referring to this, there is real competition for talent. But Google and Apple were small once upon a time. And I also saw an online report from the Space Foundation. In 2019, there were 183,000 jobs in this sector, and that did not include aerospace. So again, whatever we're doing here, we're going to do there. And it seems to me that people who are interested should really not shy away from their vision. You know, my research is on the impact of seeing the Earth from orbit. I call it the overview effect. I've been interviewing people who've signed up for Virgin Galactic. That's why they're going. NASA astronauts don't go to look at the Earth. They go to do scientific experiments for the most part. But we now have people who are going and paying good money for the experience itself. So I would just leave it with, imagine the so-called space tourism industry and look at all the jobs that we have on the Earth for tourism. And many of them are non-technical, as we've been saying. And so I believe that we're at the cusp of really exponential growth. Like most exponential growth curves, it seems very incremental until it takes off. So I believe we could see a huge growth spurt, and it'll be surprising. And I really hope that's what happens. I don't know if this is my analysis or my wish. Perhaps they go together, but I do see that possibility. And I talk to a lot of young people about this, and I know they're excited and they're hoping it turns out like that. So I'll leave it at that, but that's what I think is going to happen.
Thank you, Frank. Fascinating. Thanks for the reference to State of the Place. And I love your expression, whatever it is that we're doing here, we're going to do there. So that opens up the picture very, very nicely. So thank you. Sam, over to you.
Thanks, Eamonn. Just to pick up where Frank left off, actually the level of interest and opportunity in the space sector, I don't think has ever been higher, which makes it a fantastic time to be looking at the sector. And just look at the integrated review which the UK released recently. As space is featuring really prominently. So a couple of quick points on sort of skills in space. I think the first one for me is that space isn't special from a skills perspective. It's cool, it's hard in some ways, but actually Elon Musk took a lot of his automotive engineers from Tesla into SpaceX because of the skills and what they could bring. So we need to demystify space. It's not that hard. The second point, which Catherine's really brought out already, is about diversity. So it's extremely important with the place that Frank's just described. It's a future economic zone that really needs all sorts of different thinking and people and ideas to actually capitalize on it to make the best that we can for Earth. At the Catapult, for example, we've consciously not brought in too many people directly from the space sector. Some fantastic people in the space sector, but that diversity of thought is really, really important. So we need to look at what we need now and then at least 10 years in the future, because there's obviously a bit of a lag with skills. And I'd certainly highlight robotics and AI as a key skill for the space sector, because as I said, in response to the earlier question, I think that assembly and manufacture and creating big infrastructure in space is going to be a key thing for the next little while, and those skills are going to be hugely important. Then it's everything that you've touched on already, which is the space sector is technically really very good, but actually we need so many other skills. It's sociologists, economists, definitely business people, business acumen, finance expertise. It's those sorts of things that are really going to unlock the space sector. Alongside that, there's how you work with other sectors. So the sectors that space touches already through the services it delivers, like connectivity, say for agriculture or transport. And then bringing these other sectors I've talked about, like the energy sector towards things like solar power in space. Those are interesting. But more readily, there are a bunch of adjacent sectors that can be brought towards space to create the sector that we really need tomorrow. And it's going to be a very different looking sector, very different makeup to what it is today. So we could bring advanced manufacturing, robotics, those sorts of skills towards the space sector now that would really make a difference. Entrepreneurial aspects are also very important, and we've seen the benefits of those over the last 5 to 10 years. So the combination of ambitious young startups plus the massively capable space industry that exists today, it's that sort of tension and playing off each other and working together that's really driven this shift we've seen recently, and that's going to be hugely important moving forward. And there's so many great support mechanisms for entrepreneurs, from ESA business incubators, UK Space Agency's got a business incubation network. Just in Oxford, you've got the Foundry and things like Creative Destruction Labs. It's a great landscape of support there for people that do want to engage. I think there are some challenges, and I think the thing we really need to do is make sure there's sufficient ambition and vision and capability to realise what a big opportunities, but they're going to need finance and working together and technical innovation, perhaps on a scale that we've not seen before. But if we can get that, it's really, really exciting times for the space sector. And like Frank, I think it really is on the cusp. And for anyone that's entering the sort of world of work now, one of the best pieces of advice I was given was sort of skate towards where the money's going to be at the peak of your career, which is in sort of 20 plus years time. And I think the space sector is a fantastic bet for many, many people.
Fabulous. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Frank. Frank just had to step out for a moment. He'll be joining us again in a second. Well, lots to think about there. I mean, the picture that I'm getting is that it's an exciting space, especially for people looking for careers. And what struck me is, it's competitive from a sort of employer's point of view, which has got to be good for employees. The competition for talent, that there's a diversity of talent and people needed precisely because of the innovative and potentially novel nature of the work and the long-term agenda. But also I like the point that each of you touched on about need to demystify space in a way, that it's not just the domain of double PhD physicists and rocket scientists, that we need all sorts of people in this sector to make it work, and as you said, Sam and Catherine, to unlock it. But also importantly, that transferability of skills as well, that if you are working in one particular sector, you may well have skills that are valuable to those in the space sector too. I also liked the description of space as a future economic zone, actually, and needing the equality and diversity of thought, to actually shape what that ends up looking like in the long term. So once again, brilliant insights. Thank you very much for just really enriching that topic and casting a completely new light on it, that hopefully for those of us that have tuned in will be thinking about careers in space, and perhaps you've opened some doors for them that they may well have thought were either closed or didn't exist. So thank you. So with that, I think I'll hand over to open the floor to the audience, and we have got some questions coming in, some which are very interesting. I think I'll go first to this one from, let me get this pronunciation correct, I probably won't, but Chor Liang from Cambodia. And the question here is, what would you recommend to emerging countries without legacy space agencies that want to benefit from space commerce? So how about we start with you, Catherine, and then over to Sam.
Yeah, thanks. Interesting question. In many respects, I think countries that haven't got sort of legacy space agency and approach to space are actually quite well the best advantage, because I think you're sort of starting without the the hinterland of history. I spoke earlier about how there's the sort of commercial side of space, and then there's the kind of exploration side. actually can bring an awful lot to country infrastructure and delivery of services. So I think the first thing I'd say is one thing's very well in the UK was kind of around to do. So I'd certainly recognise around what you're trying to do and get a kind of people who have a shared vision together, ideally involving a government, but it doesn't necessarily. And then be just sort of having your idea about how you want to use space and kind of going for it, and thinking about the part that space can play in infrastructure, and forming your view about how you're going to exploit space infrastructure that other people have for and put. So, you know, just taking one example, you know, the Copernicus program is something which has been invested in European countries and others, and is, you know, is run by a sort of coalition of member states, European Space Agency and the European Commission. It has partner agencies from around the world and is part of a system of systems. But people can benefit freely from the dive infrastructure and services off the back of that to grow a commercial sector without needing to be part of, you know, space infrastructure element. So I suppose my three watchwords were: be organised, be aware of what's already there, and think about the fact to be encumbered by a history in space. You know, it can actually be quite liberating to start from first principles and think about how you want to use space to benefit your economy.
Thank you. Sam, any thoughts?
I think that was a great response from Catherine. Yeah, there's lots of different aspects to space commerce, and actually using data from space to deliver benefits to countries is relatively low cost. It's a bit like there tend to be data plays, so that's a kind of low cost entry point. You've then got, you know, a lot of the revolution recently has been around lower cost, small satellites, lower cost ways of doing things, and some real innovation there. So there's a great set of platforms that you could bring and leverage and use to drive growth. I think Catherine touched on it, but perhaps emphasize it even more, that space is just such a great area for international partnership and collaboration, and actually working out how you can work with other countries and partners to perhaps do something bigger than you might be able to do as a single country is really fantastic. But the point, you know, having, like Catherine, seen the benefits of things, what started out as the space innovation and growth strategy in the UK, it's been absolutely transformational. I think the ability to bring government, industry and academia together against a long-term plan, and it just grows from there.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to now turn to a question from Anneke Jansen in the Netherlands. I think this one's for you, Frank. It says, what do you think the biggest ethical challenges are going to be with regard to the development of the future space job market?
Well, this is an issue that I've been giving a lot of thought to. I have founded an organization called the Human Space Program, and one of our tasks is to think about the ethical challenges. And one of the biggest ones has already been mentioned, and I think I'd like to mention it again, and that has to do with diversity and inclusion. That is to say, most of the people I know who've been interested in space exploration and development for the last 30 or 40 years are drawn by the idea that we can do better than we've done on Earth, that it's a fresh start, it's an opportunity to do better. And one of the aspects of doing better is to avoid the problems that have occurred in previous great eras of exploration, where a certain group of people dominated that period, and it turned out not only to be exploration but also exploitation. And I think one of the key ways in which to avoid that happening again, going back to the emerging countries, is to have multiple voices involved and not the usual suspects. And I believe a lot of people realize that the space sector has a lot of work to do there. And I've talked about a no regrets space policy. That is to say, I don't want to look back on this period and say, gosh, I wish we'd thought of that. Or, you know, I don't want my descendants to look back and say, why didn't Frank take a stand about that? You know, and we have it happening right now. We're trying to unwind a lot of things that happened 500 years ago when we had great exploration, but we made a lot of mistakes. So that's one. Given time, I could list 10 more, but I think that's the one we should focus on right now.
Great. Thank you, Frank. And I think that also speaks a little bit to another question we had from Cambodia, actually, which I think you've covered it a little bit, which is what role does the young generation in developing countries play to be a part of the industry? So I think that reminder to, you know, enable and create opportunities and to look for those opportunities so we don't carry the same mistakes over into the future is a solid reminder. Thank you. I'm going to go to a question now from Sam Akamir in London. In which time frame now do you see the popularization of space travel? So this is a question that, you know, seems to be capturing people's imagination. There's a couple of other questions related to that in the chat. So, Eamonn, who'd like to speak first?
I'm holding back.
Go on,
I want
Frank.
Catherine to go first.
Okay, Catherine, you go first.
Okay.
Okay. I think, well, I mean by popularization, I mean, this speaks a bit to the ethical question, which is quite an ethical question about equality of access to space for people, and you know, it become truly when everyone's got access to getting into space. I'm going to go quite far out. I don't see it as something that's going to happen particularly quickly, but I think we will see a lot more, you know, kind of a lot more people going into space and a lot more people traveling in space. I think the interesting question, which is much more in Frank's ballpark, what that then does for the kind of specialness of the overview effect. You know, does it become more or less special that more people see it? And, you know, what does that do for humanity's perspective? Or is it one of those topics where, you know, it sort of works for people who got it anyway? So I think it raises some interesting questions, but I think we're quite some way off the popularization of space travel. Personally, I'd put it kind of, you know, 50 years into the future, but I'm very welcome to be proved wrong.
I'll perhaps pull it back slightly, but you're probably not far off, I don't think, Kathy. I mean, I remember going to an event in 2004 and being very excited about sort of space tourism going to be kicking off in the next couple of years, and you know, hopefully it might happen this year. But actually, you know, I think what we are seeing is the level of development and advances in rocketry and propulsion, and Elon Musk literally talking about producing thousands of starships. It's the access to space is going to open up, and whilst it probably is going to be sadly largely open to people with deep pockets for the short to medium term, I do think we're going to see a steady increase, and things like private space stations we could well see them within a 10-ish year time frame, and it's going to keep growing from there. So yeah, I think we're on the cusp, but it's going to be a slow burn.
Frank, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, well, Sam mentioned 2004. I think that's when Virgin Galactic was founded. Sir Richard Branson hoped they'd be flying very soon after that. They haven't made it yet in terms of flying paying customers. However, we should think about the fact that they've got enough people signed up that if they do start flying, in a few years, they would more likely have flown more people than all the space agencies since 1961. And so once they have that breakthrough, I think it'll go excuse me, rather quickly. I have a colleague who has moved actually to Brownsville, Texas, to keep an eye on what Elon Musk is doing. And she has said to me, this is going to happen faster than we think. In contrast to Virgin, as Sam mentioned, they are turning out starships faster than they can fly them. And more than that, they have adapted the Starship not only to go to Mars, but to go into low Earth orbit and to do more immediate space tourism types of flights. So pick your model, NASA, Virgin Galactic, or SpaceX, and that's going to determine how fast it's going to happen. I want to say one other thing about Catherine's point. My original theory about the overview effect was about people living permanently out there in the solar system, and I thought it would be rather ordinary, not a big breakthrough. It would just be, there's the Earth in the sky. Of course, it's a whole system, everything's interconnected, and so on. When we started talking to astronauts, we found it was somewhat shocking what they saw. And so now we're talking about bringing the overview effect down to Earth. That means either giving people the experience like the astronauts or using virtual reality to give them the experience. And I've said that I think it really ought to be a human right to have the experience directly or indirectly. Everybody should have a chance. Because when I talk to astronauts, it's so incredible and so positive. We really have to have a paradigm shift and consider it to be something every human being ought to have a chance to have. If that kind of commitment were made, that would change everything too, I suppose. But that could take 50 years too, Catherine, to get the idea of the overview effect as a human right out there.
That's a fascinating insight, that it's, the shift in the human psyche might take longer than the technology takes to produce, but that won't be the first time that's happened in history either. So what I'm going to do, I've got lots of great questions coming in. I'm going to combine two. I hope you don't mind, Gigi Edmondson in Boston and Anita Burney in Reading. I'm going to combine your two questions. Gigi asked about the differentiation of the job market internationally. So whether I assume whether there be clusters of expertise in different countries, a bit like, say, we may have now. Whereas Anita was quoted you, Sam, and said, you said follow the money. And she says, well, where's the money going to be to support the space skills sector in particular? So I'll start with Catherine with that one, please. Thank you.
So this is sort of differentiation versus particularity and that sort of thing. I mean, I think there probably will be, I think there'll be sort of core job and skills needs that will be global. And then I think some things will be driven by whatever that country is doing and who they're collaborating with. So in terms of some of the skills that I think are going to be global, I think the kind of particularly, I mean, this is personal view, but particularly the kind of data skills, the adjacent skills from AI, machine learning, and so on are going to be the skills that are going to be most important. And then how you kind of pull space technology. So that kind of general taking away of space blindness, if you like, understanding how space is enmeshed in daily life, I think is going to be the global skill. And then I think, after that, it will come down to what particular countries are doing. So, if you're in the UK and, our next big thing is that we want to start putting structures in space and doing power from space, or we're particularly driven to be very green in space. So we're looking for green propulsion technologies and green materials and that kind of thing. Those will be the skills that we will need. So I think it's, how are you going to tell? I'd say look to your country's kind of space strategies, yes, but look to the way that your general economy is going. I think that will be as big a guide for where those space skills will come in as anything else. And I think you can get very focused in on what you think people are doing, you know, in the space domain. And I think it's as much about reading the signals about your country's priorities in the round would be the way I would look at it.
Thank you. Yeah, Sam, any thoughts?
Thanks, Eamonn. I definitely agree with all that Catherine said. Now to build on an earlier point, space is really broad and it's going to cover all sorts of sectors. And yeah, I think Catherine's got it exactly right. And insofar as each country will hopefully develop a kind of national strategy or something similar, and then what are your current strengths? Where do you think you could be strong? And you plan to build the greatest sort of advantage that you can. I mean, I think we all hope with space as well. There's a lot of cooperation between nations, but yeah, who's going to be launching stuff? Who's going to be manufacturing stuff? Who's going to be taking the data out and doing things with that? There's roles for everyone in space, and I think there's lots of opportunities now over the next 10 years to really work out where different nations really are going to be excellent at different things. You also asked about where the money's going to be. I think in the short term, there's lots of great commercial opportunities around. Certainly the big constellations that are being put up for connectivity and observation. And then if we're looking further out, Catherine just mentioned space-based solar power, but big infrastructure in space and the next generation of systems. So you can create systems that can deliver direct to mobile connectivity, so you can have larger antenna, etc. And then slowly over time, we'll be working out towards the moon and beyond. But in the short term, there are some real good commercial opportunities, and the finance sector is getting very, very interested in space now. Okay,
thank you very much. Well, we're now rapidly approaching 1600 GMT, so we're winding up the hour. Thank you to our panelists for those excellent insights. You've certainly painted, as I said earlier, a very rich picture. You've described many of the opportunities and challenges for the space sector. Both, you've added a lot of complexity, I think, to the picture that many of us have of space, as the old space view, but also the new space and what's emerging. The amount of energy and activity that's going on in that sector at the moment is, truly impressive. And of course, you've all contributed to that in a way. But I've taken away a few key insights. One is this idea that you just mentioned, Catherine, of space blindness. I like that. I like the idea that what's so special about space anyway? Why can't we all go there? Why can't we all work in that sector? Everybody sort of welcomes that. I think opens a lot of doors, and that's a lovely concept to keep working with, I think. So I may well quote you on that in the future, if that's okay. I also love the idea of poets in space. What a great idea. What a wonderful way to communicate what it's like out there. And I hadn't really fully appreciated, Frank, just quite how important that overview, or that view of it was to the human psyche. And I think that will resonate with a lot of people who are interested, but maybe don't quite know why they're interested in this sector to such an extent. So, and I'll certainly read your latest book on that one. Sam, the future economic zone, what a wonderful way to think about space as a place. I mean, because that's precisely what's happening, and yet we do tend to have these ideas of it as this abstract void in a way, full of adventurers, and yet practically there's so much activity going on that is exactly as treating it as a future economic zone. And I also liked the notion that all of you touched on. Thank you for doing so as well. But I think the expression goes to Catherine for this vibrant inclusiveness that is needed in space. And there is a genuine opportunity to think about this as a place, and then we can start thinking about what kind of a place we want it to be. So on that note, thank you once again for your time. It's been hugely enlightening and very much appreciated on behalf of everybody here at the Side Business School, Pembroke College and Oxford University. Thank you once again.